Hello everyone and welcome back to Nocturnal Narrative Studio. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know which country you're listening from. Without further ado, let's begin the story. The headaches started 3 days after the surgery. Not the dull throb Dr. Winters had warned me about, but sharp ice-pick jabs behind my left eye, the one he'd operated on. I called his office twice before his receptionist finally put me through. "Some discomfort is normal, Ms. Chen," he said, his voice carrying that practiced medical reassurance. "The corneal reshaping procedure is quite invasive." "This isn't discomfort," I insisted, "and I'm seeing things. Shadows at the edge of my vision." A pause. "Floaters are common after surgery. Dark spots that drift across your visual field. These don't drift, they move deliberately, and they're only visible from my left eye." Another pause, longer this time. "Come in tomorrow morning, I'll take a look." That night I covered my right eye with a patch, testing what I'd been experiencing for days. With only my fixed left eye working, they became immediately apparent. Shadow. Figures standing in the corners of my apartment, visible only in my peripheral vision. When I turned to look directly at them, they vanished, only to reappear at the edges again. I counted 5 distinct shadows, each with its own vague shape and movement pattern. One tall and thin, one child-sized, one that seemed to drift near, the ceiling. They kept their distance, observing. Sleep was impossible. I sat in the center of my living room, back against the wall, watching the shadows watch me until dawn diluted their presence. Dr. Winters examined my eye the next morning, his movements methodical as he shined lights and checked pressures. I described the shadows in detail, watching his expression for concern. Instead, I caught something else: recognition. "Your cornea is healing beautifully," he said, leaning back. "What you're experiencing is a known side effect we call adaptation phenomena. Your brain is adjusting to your new visual acuity." "You didn't mention this adaptation phenomena before the surgery," he smiled thinly. "It only affects about 2% of patients, and it's temporary. I'll prescribe something for the headaches. The visual disturbances should resolve within 2 weeks." I didn't believe him, but I took the prescription and left. The medication dulled the headaches, but did nothing for the shadows. They grew bolder, venturing closer when I wasn't looking directly at them. Twice I spun around quickly enough to catch one before it vanished. A dark, humanoid shape with no distinct features, like a 3-dimensional silhouette. Online research into my procedure, accelerated corneal restructuring, a new technique Dr. Winters had pioneered, yielded little information beyond promotional materials from his clinic. No mention of adaptation phenomena or shadow sightings. On day 7, post-surgery, I woke to find my bathroom mirror covered with fog despite not having showered. Written in the condensation was a single word: run. I convinced myself it was a prank or my imagination, until I noticed the shadows had multiplied. Dozens now, filling every corner, growing increasingly distinct. One had clearly defined limbs. Another had what appeared to be eyes, dark hollows in an otherwise featureless face. Most disturbing of all, I began glimpsing them with my right eye too. That afternoon, I called Dr. Winters' office again, only to be told he was unavailable indefinitely. His receptionist sounded tense, evasive. When I pressed, she hung up. Desperate, I drove to his clinic after hours, hoping to find someone who could help. The building was dark except for a single light in a back office. I knocked on the glass doors until a janitor reluctantly let me in. "Dr. Winters ain't been here for 3 days, he said, eyeing me suspiciously. "Left suddenly, staff's all talking about it." "I need my patient file," I said. "It's an emergency." He hesitated, then shrugged. "Records room's down the hall." I didn't see nothing. The records room was organized alphabetically. I found my file quickly, surprisingly thin for a surgical patient. Inside was my basic information, consent forms, and a single notation on my post-operative visit. Subject demonstrates Class 3 perception. Monitoring initiated. Subject, not patient. A separate filing cabinet labeled ACR protocol contained folders for 23 patients, all who had undergone the same procedure within the past year. Each folder had a classification, most marked Class 1 no perception, some Class 2 limited perception, and 3, including mine, Class 3 full perception. A fourth classification on a single folder chilled me. Class 4 interaction. The patient's name was Eliza Weiss. I took my file and Eliza's, ignoring the janitor's disapproving look as I hurried out. Eliza's address was in her file, an apartment across town. I drove there immediately, shadows flickering at the edges of my vision the entire way. Her building was run down, security non-existent, no one answered her door. Looking for Eliza, an elderly woman had emerged from the neighboring apartment. She's gone. Gone where? The woman shrugged. Don't know. Men came for her stuff 2 days ago. Said they were family, but Eliza didn't have family. She leaned closer. She was acting strange before she disappeared. Talking about shadows watching her. Thought she was having a breakdown. I showed her my eye. Did she have surgery recently? Like this? The woman nodded slowly. Same doctor as you, I bet. Handsome man, silver hair. Eliza was so excited about fixing her vision. Then she started seeing things. In my car, I examined Eliza's file more carefully. Her notes were similar to mine until her final entry. Subject reports two-way communication with entities. Extraction protocol initiated. Entities. Not hallucinations or side effects. Entities. That night, the shadows became fully visible even when I looked directly at them. They maintained their distance, observing silently from corners and doorways. I covered both eyes but could still sense their presence, a weight in the room, a feeling of being watched. I barricaded myself in the bathroom, the only room small enough to check every corner. With shaking hands, I called the only person I thought might believe me, my cousin Maya, who'd always been interested in fringe science and conspiracy theories. I need you to research something called accelerated corneal restructuring and Dr. Raymond Winters, I said when she answered. And I need a place to stay where no one would look for me. Maya's voice was instantly alert. What's happening, Ava? I'm being watched by things that shouldn't exist, and I think my eye surgeon did it deliberately. To her credit, Maya asked no further questions. I have a cabin upstate, isolated. I'll text you the location. Don't use GPS to get there. I left my phone and credit cards behind, taking only cash, Eliza's file, and a few essentials. The shadows followed me to my car, more numerous than before. Some now distinctly humanoid while others remained amorphous, shifting forms like smoke. Maya's cabin was 3 hours north, deep in the woods at the end of a dirt road. By the time I arrived, dawn was breaking. The shadows were less visible in daylight, but I could still detect their movements. A darkening at the edge of vision, a sense of presence. Maya arrived that afternoon with supplies and a laptop. I've been researching all night, she said, hugging me tightly. You're not going to like what I found. She showed me articles about Raymond Winters, a respected ophthalmologist who had made breakthroughs in corneal surgery. But Maya had dug deeper, finding connections between Winters and a research group called the Perception Advancement Collective. They believe reality is subjective, that what we perceive is just a fraction of what actually exists around us, she explained. Their manifesto talks about lifting the veil and expanding human perception beyond evolutionary limitations. By performing eye surgery? I asked skeptically. The cornea isn't just a lens, Ava. Some researchers believe it acts as a filter, preventing us from seeing certain wavelengths or entities that exist alongside us. That's insane, is it? She gestured to the corner of the room where I could see a shadow figure watching us. What exactly are you seeing? I described the shadows in detail, how they'd evolved from vague shapes to distinct figures, how they seemed to observe rather than threaten. They've always been there, Maya said quietly. Winters didn't create them. He just modified your cornea to perceive them. Why would he do that without consent? Because who would consent to seeing entities that exist beyond our normal perception? She pulled up another document, a scientific paper Winters had published years earlier, theorizing that human perception had been evolutionarily limited as a survival mechanism. He believes we're meant to see everything, that our limited perception is a flaw, not a feature. That night, the entities grew bolder. One approached as I sat by the fireplace, extending what appeared to be a limb toward me. I recoiled, and it retreated to the shadows. They're curious about you, Maya observed. About being seen. Eliza's file mentioned communication, I said. She could interact with them. And then she disappeared. We spent the next day researching the other patients from the files I'd taken. Through social media and news searches, we discovered a pattern of the 23 patients, 7 had reported mental health episodes after their surgeries. 4 had been admitted to psychiatric facilities. 3, including Eliza, had disappeared entirely. They're eliminating the class 3s and 4s, Maya concluded, the ones who can really see. But why perform the surgery if they're just going to eliminate successful subjects? Maybe they're looking for specific people, those who can see without going insane. Or maybe... She hesitated. Maybe they're not the ones doing the eliminating. I thought of the entities, growing more distinct by the day. You think these shadow things are removing people who can see them? Wouldn't you, if you'd existed unobserved for millennia, only to suddenly become visible? That night I woke to find the cabin filled with entities, dozens standing motionless around my bed. One, taller than the others, stood at the foot, its featureless face oriented toward mine. For the first time I heard them, not with my ears but directly in my mind, a chorus of whispers. You see us now. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. Maya slept peacefully in the next room, unaware. We have existed alongside humanity always, unseen, undisturbed, until the doctor gave you eyes to perceive us. What do you want? I managed to think back at them. To remain unseen. Your kind is not ready for coexistence. Those who see must be removed. Eliza communicated with you. What happened to her? An image flashed in my mind. Eliza surrounded by entities, reaching out to touch one. Then darkness. She sought knowledge, beyond boundaries. She attempted to cross over. The membrane between our realities is thin but absolute. I don't want knowledge or crossing over, I thought desperately. I want my normal vision back. A ripple of something like amusement passed through their collective consciousness. Impossible. Once the veil is lifted, it cannot be replaced. But there are alternatives to removal. They showed me images of Dr. Winters performing the same surgery on dozens, hundreds of patients. A world where everyone could see the entities, where the boundaries between realities dissolved completely. The doctor believes coexistence is inevitable. We disagree. Humanity is not prepared. So, you've been removing his successful patients? Killing them? Not killing. Relocating. To a place between perceptions. Another image. A gray dimension where the removed patients existed in a suspended state, neither alive nor dead, simply elsewhere. You have a choice, Ava Chen. Join them or help us stop the doctor. The next morning, I told Maya everything. She listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. They want to use you against Winters, she concluded. But can you trust them? Can I trust a surgeon who altered my perception without consent? I countered. At least they're being honest about their intentions. We debated for hours. The entities remained visible but distant, waiting for my decision. Finally, I agreed to their proposal. I would help locate Winters and his research in exchange for protection from relocation. Maya would drive me back to the city where the WoW entities believed Winters was continuing his work under a different identity. As we prepared to leave, Maya pulled me aside. Are you sure about this? You're making a deal with entities we barely understand. I'm choosing the option that doesn't. Involve being relocated to some between dimension, I said, and maybe stopping Winters from doing this to more people. The drive back was tense, the entities following our car like a shadow caravan. They guided us not to Winters' clinic, but to an abandoned research facility on the outskirts of the city. The building appeared derelict, but lights flickered in basement windows. He's continuing his work underground, Maya whispered as we approached. Literally, we found a service entrance unlocked. The entity's doing, somehow. Inside, the facility had been converted into a state-of-the-art surgical center. In a central room, Dr. Winters was preparing a patient for the procedure, assisted by 2 nurses. The entities urged me forward, their message clear. Stop him. I stepped into the room. Dr. Winters. He turned, startled, then smiled when he recognized me. Ms. Chen, I've been concerned about you. I know what you're doing, I said, altering perception to see them. I gestured to the entities now filling the room, visible only to me. Then you understand the importance of my work, he said, surprisingly calm. We've been blind, Ms. Chen. Humanity has shared this reality with other beings for millennia, never knowing, never seeing. They don't want to be seen, I countered. They've been removing your successful patients. His expression darkened. Temporary setback. Once enough people can perceive them, they can't possibly relocate everyone. Coexistence becomes inevitable. You're forcing an interaction they don't want. Progress requires disruption, he said dismissively. These entities have observed us since our evolution began. They've influenced our development, our history, while remaining conveniently invisible. That ends now. The patient on the table stirred, concerned by our argument. Winters turned to reassure them, giving me a moment to assess the room. Surgical equipment, computers with research data, and most importantly, a safe with what appeared to be additional vials of the solution he'd used in my surgery. The entities pressed closer, their message urgent. Destroy it all. I lunged for a tray of surgical equipment, sending it crashing to the floor. Maya appeared in the doorway, distracting the nurses while I grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and smashed it into the nearest computer. Chaos erupted. Winters tried to restrain me, but the entities intervened. Not physically, but by creating disorienting visual distortions that affected everyone in the room. Equipment seemed to shift position. Shadows moved independently, causing confusion and panic. In the mayhem, I reached the safe, finding it unlocked in the doctor's haste. Inside were dozens of vials and, crucially, research notes detailing the corneal modification procedure. Burn it, the entities urged. End this intrusion. I hesitated, suddenly uncertain. Was I being manipulated? Was Winters right about coexistence? Being inevitable? Perhaps even necessary? One entity, the tall one that had spoken to me at the cabin, moved closer than any had before. We have existed alongside humanity without interference. We observe, we learn, but we do not intervene. Your kind is not ready for the knowledge that comes with true perception. It has driven many of your kind to madness. But some adapt, I argued. Like me. Few adapt. Most break. The doctor plays with forces beyond his understanding. In that moment, I made my decision. I grabbed Winters' research notes and the vials, dumping them into a metal trash can. As security alarms began blaring, Maya's doing, I set the contents ablaze with a surgical lighter. Winters lunged at me, his face contorted with rage. Do you have any idea what you're destroying? Years of research, the next step in human evolution. I'm preventing you from changing people without their informed consent, I shot back, from seeing things they're not equipped to process. As smoke filled the room and sprinklers activated, we fled the facility. Police and fire trucks arrived minutes later, responding to the alarms. From a safe distance, we watched the chaos unfold. What happens now? Maya asked. You can still see them. The entities surrounded us, more visible to me than ever. I think that's the point. I'm their insurance policy, someone who can see them but understands why others shouldn't. You will monitor the doctor, they confirmed in my mind. Ensure This knowledge remains contained. Winters was arrested that night, not for his experimental surgeries, which would be difficult to prove, but for operating an unlicensed surgical facility and insurance fraud. His research was dismissed as the ravings of a brilliant mind gone astray. I still see the entities every day. They maintain their distance but remain watchful. Sometimes I catch them interacting with our world in subtle ways, adjusting the trajectory of a falling object, whispering suggestions that people mistake for their own thoughts. They've existed alongside us forever. These shadow observers, neither malevolent nor benevolent, simply other. And through my modified perception, I've become their reluctant ambassador, the one human who sees them and keeps their secret. The headaches have stopped, but the awareness never fades. There are layers to reality most people will never perceive, entities that share our space while existing in a different perceptual dimension. Perhaps someday humanity will be ready for that knowledge, but not yet. Not like this. Sometimes in unguarded moments, I wonder about Eliza and the others who were relocated. Are they conscious in that in-between place? Do they regret their curiosity? The tall entity, sensing my thoughts, approaches. They are at peace, it assures me. When humanity is ready, they will return as guides. I'm not entirely convinced, but I've learned to live with uncertainty and with the constant awareness of being watched from the corner of my eye. Love the story? Show us with a like, hit that subscribe button, and share your scariest idea in the comments. And don't forget to tell us the time and where you're listening from. We want to know where the fear is spreading. I've always been a light sleeper. The slightest noise, a car door slamming outside, the refrigerator cycling on, and I'm wide awake. So when I started experiencing sleep paralysis during my first semester of grad school, I blamed it on stress, on the adjustment to a new city, and the pressure of my anthropology program at Miskatonic University. For those unfamiliar with sleep paralysis, it's a phenomenon where you wake up mentally but remain physically paralyzed. Your body naturally paralyzes itself during REM sleep to prevent you from acting out your dreams. Sometimes, when transitioning between sleep states, you become conscious while still paralyzed. It's terrifying. You can't move, can't speak, can only lie there fully aware but helpless, and sometimes you hallucinate. My first episode happened about 3 months into the fall semester. I woke around 3 a.m., unable to move. Panic set in immediately, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps, the only bodily function I seemed able to control. That's when I noticed the shadow in the corner of my bedroom. It was darker than the surrounding darkness, a hunched silhouette, roughly the shape of a person, but wrong somehow. Too angular in places, too fluid in others. As I watched, frozen, in my bed, it began to move toward me, slowly, deliberately, each movement jerky and unnatural. I tried to scream, to thrash against my invisible restraints, but nothing happened. The shadow figure reached the foot of my bed and stopped. It had no discernible face, just a deeper darkness where features should be. But I could feel it watching me. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, my paralysis broke. I sat up with a gasp, fumbling for the lamp switch. When light flooded the room, the figure was gone. I told myself it was just a hallucination, a common symptom of sleep paralysis. I'd read about it in my undergraduate psychology courses. Nothing to worry about. But it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Always the same figure, always approaching from the same corner, always stopping at the foot of my bed. Sometimes it would reach out a distorted limb toward me. Sometimes it would just stand there observing. After 2 weeks of this, I was a wreck. I started avoiding sleep, staying up until exhaustion forced my eyes closed. I drank so much coffee that my hands shook constantly. My academic performance began to suffer. That's when Dr. Eleanor Voss, my faculty advisor, suggested I participate in a sleep study being conducted by the university's neuroscience department. They're specifically looking at parasomnias, she explained. Sleep paralysis, night terrors, that sort of thing. They might be able to help, and at the very least, you'd be contributing to research. I agreed immediately. Anything seemed better than another night alone with the shadow. The sleep lab was in the basement of the science building, a sterile space with monitoring rooms surrounding a central area filled with equipment. Dr. Karim Nasser, the lead researcher, was a tall man with kind eyes that couldn't quite hide his excitement when I described my experiences. "The same entity each time?" he asked, leaning forward. "With consistent behavior patterns." I nodded, uncomfortable with his enthusiasm. "Isn't that normal for sleep paralysis hallucinations?" "Actually, no," he said, tapping his pen against his clipboard. "Most sleep paralysis hallucinations vary significantly between episodes and individuals. Consistency like you're describing is unusual." That night I slept in one of the lab's monitoring rooms, wired to machines measuring my brain, activity, heart rate, muscle tension, and eye movement. Cameras recorded my sleep from multiple angles. Dr. Nasser and his team monitored everything from the adjacent room. I didn't expect to sleep well in such an environment, but exhaustion won out. And sure enough, at approximately 3:17 a.m., according to the logs, I experienced another episode of sleep paralysis. The shadow appeared, as it always did, from the corner of the room. It approached my bed with those same jerky, unnatural movements. I tried to signal somehow to the researchers watching, but could only lie there, my eyes tracking the figure as it reached the foot of my bed. This time, however, something different happened. The shadow leaned forward, its featureless head tilting as if studying me more closely. Then it raised what passed for an arm and pointed directly at the two-way mirror, where I knew the researchers were watching. My paralysis broke moments later, and I sat up gasping for air. Dr. Nasser and two assistants rushed into the room. "Did you see it?" I demanded. "The shadow figure, did your cameras catch it?" The look they exchanged told me everything before Dr. Nasser even spoke. "There was nothing visible on the cameras," he said carefully. "But your brain activity during the episode was remarkable." The next morning, Dr. Nasser showed me the readings from the night before. "This is normal REM sleep," he explained, pointing to one section of the EEG readout. "And this is when you experience the paralysis." The pattern changed dramatically, not just the expected shift in brain waves, but something else, something structured. "These patterns here," he continued, indicating a series of regular oscillations, "they're not typical of hallucination or dream states. They're more consistent with, well, with communication." "Communication?" I repeated. "What do you mean?" "Your brain was processing information as if engaged in communication with another intelligence," he said. "Similar to patterns we see during conversation or when processing language, but with significant differences." He hesitated, then added, "I've only seen readings like this once before, in a classified study I participated in during my postdoc." Over the next week, I returned to the sleep lab every night. Each time, the shadow appeared. Each time, the EEG showed the same communication-like patterns. And each time, the cameras recorded nothing. After the seventh night, Dr. Nasser invited me to his office. Unlike the sterile lab, his workspace was cluttered with books, papers, and artifacts, small statues and tablets that reflected his background in both neuroscience and anthropology. "I haven't been entirely forthcoming with you," he admitted, closing the door. "Your case isn't as unique as you might think." He pulled a worn leather folder from his desk drawer and spread its contents before me. Photocopies of ancient texts, photographs of cave paintings, pages from what appeared to be medieval manuscripts. All depicted similar figures, hunched, shadowy entities observing sleeping humans. "These accounts span cultures, continents, and millennia," he explained. "Ancient Sumerians, medieval Europeans, indigenous Australians, pre-Columbian Americans, all describe nearly identical entities that appear during sleep paralysis. They're called by different names: Watchers, Threshold Guardians, the Between Ones. But the descriptions are remarkably consistent. So they're a universal archetype," I suggested. a common hallucination produced by the human brain under stress. Dr. Nasser shook his head. That was the prevailing theory until recently, but new research, including our own, suggests something else might be happening. He tapped the EEG readings. These communication patterns are too structured to be random neural firing, and too consistent across subjects. Subjects? I caught the plural. How many others have you studied? 17 over the past 5 years, he said, all experiencing nearly identical phenomena, all showing similar brain activity during episodes. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the lab's aggressive air conditioning. What are you suggesting exactly? Dr. Nasser leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully. I believe these entities are real, in some sense. Not necessarily physical beings as we understand them, but intelligences that exist in a state adjacent to our reality. They can only be perceived during certain altered states of consciousness, like sleep paralysis. I struggled to find a diplomatic response. That's quite a leap from the evidence. Is it? He challenged. Consider this. When did your episodes begin? I thought back. About 3 months ago, shortly after the semester started. And what changed in your life around that time? Any new medications, traumatic experiences? I shook my head. What about your studies? Any new research areas, materials you were working with? That's when it hit me. The Hadley collection, I said slowly. I started cataloging artifacts from the Hadley expedition for my assistantship. Dr. Nasser's expression intensified. Which artifacts specifically? Mostly stone tablets and small figurines. They're from a previously unknown culture in the Peruvian highlands. I've been translating the inscriptions as part of my thesis work. Without a word, Dr. Nasser stood and moved to a locked cabinet in the corner of his office. He returned with a stone tablet remarkably similar to those I'd been working with. This was recovered from a different expedition in the Caucasus Mountains, he said. The symbols are different, but the translation is nearly identical to some of the Hadley artifacts. It warns about entities that exist at the threshold between worlds, beings that observe humans during vulnerable states. He traced the symbols with his finger. It specifically mentions sleep as a doorway, a time when the barrier between worlds thins, and it warns against attracting their attention. How would one do that? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. By acknowledging them, by handling artifacts connected to them, by studying them. He met my eyes. By participating in sleep studies about them. Over the next few days, I dove into research, comparing the inscriptions I'd been translating with Dr. Nasser's materials. The similarities were undeniable. Both described entities that existed in a state called the between, or the threshold. Both warned that these beings were ancient observers of humanity, studying us during our most vulnerable moments. Most disturbing were the passages suggesting that these entities occasionally attempted to communicate with humans, and that such communication could lead to a thinning between worlds. My episodes continued, but now I noticed changes. The shadow figure came closer each night, no longer stopping at the foot of my bed but approaching my side. Sometimes it would lean over me, its featureless face inches from mine, and I began to feel something during these encounters, a pressure in my mind like someone pressing against a door. A week after our meeting, Dr. Nasser called me in a state of agitation. I need you to come to the lab immediately, he said. There's been a development. When I arrived, he showed me footage from the previous night's sleep study, not mine, but another participant's. The video showed a young woman in the throes of sleep paralysis, her eyes wide with terror, tracking something invisible around the room. Watch the equipment, Dr. Nasser instructed. I observed as the monitoring screens flickered, data readouts distorted, and, most chillingly, a shadow passed across the camera lens, a shadow with no apparent source. The cameras caught something, I whispered. Yes, Dr. Nasser confirmed. For the first time. And look at this. He showed me the woman's EEG readings, which matched mine almost exactly. The communication patterns are getting stronger. The barrier is thinning. That night, I decided not to sleep. I sat up in my apartment, lights blazing, drinking coffee and reading through translations of the tablets. Around 3 a.m., the time my episodes usually began, I felt a familiar chill in the room. Slowly, I raised my eyes from the papers. The shadow figure stood in its usual corner, but something was different. It was more substantial somehow, less a silhouette and more a presence with weight and dimension. And I wasn't paralyzed, I was fully awake, fully mobile, and still seeing it. The entity moved toward me with those same jerky movements. I stood backing away. "What do you want?" I heard myself ask. The pressure in my mind returned, stronger than before. Not just pressing now, but probing, searching. And then, to my horror, I heard, or rather felt, a response. Not in words, but in concepts that unfolded in my consciousness. Observer, study, threshold, crossing. Crossing? I repeated. You're crossing the threshold? You. Called. Opened. Path. The realization hit me with sickening clarity. The artifacts, the study, the focused attention. We hadn't just been observing the phenomenon. We had been strengthening it, creating a connection between worlds. I ran from my apartment, driving through the night to the anthropology department. Using my key card, I accessed the storage room where the Hadley artifacts were kept. The tablets seemed to hum with energy in the dim light, their inscriptions almost shifting before my eyes. I found what I was looking for on the largest tablet, a passage I had mistranslated earlier. It didn't warn against attracting the entity's attention. It warned against sustaining it. The threshold could be closed again, but only by breaking the connection completely. I called Dr. Nasser, explaining my discovery. "We need to stop the studies," I insisted. "Stop all research into these entities. The tablets say focused attention strengthens them, creates a pathway." There was a long silence before he responded. "It's too late for that," he said finally. "The threshold has already thinned too much. They're coming through." "There must be something we can do," I pressed. Another pause. "There is one possibility. The tablets mention a ritual of severance, a way to close the threshold, but it requires someone who has communicated with them to reject the connection completely." "I'll do it," I said without hesitation. The ritual was deceptively simple. That night, in the sleep lab surrounded by the Hadley artifacts, I would allow myself to enter sleep paralysis one final time. When the entity appeared, I would need to deny it recognition, deny it access, while Dr. Nasser recited passages from the tablets. As I lay on the monitoring bed, electrodes attached to my scalp and chest, I felt a growing sense of dread. What if this didn't work? What if it made things worse? "Remember," Dr. Nasser said as he dimmed the lights, "don't engage with it. Don't acknowledge it as real. Reject its existence with your entire being." Sleep came reluctantly, but eventually, I drifted off. When I became aware again, I was paralyzed as expected. The room was darker than it should have been, the monitoring equipment barely visible in the gloom. The shadow appeared, not from the corner this time, but seemingly from within the darkness itself, as if the darkness was coalescing into its form. It approached rapidly, more confident than before. I heard Dr. Nasser begin to recite the passages, his voice steady despite the tension evident in it. The shadow reached my bedside and leaned over me, that featureless void where a face should be now inches from mine. The pressure in my mind returned, more insistent than ever. Recognition, connection, crossing, soon. With every ounce of will I possessed, I focused on denial. "You are not real. You are a hallucination. You are nothing but neural misfiring and ancient superstition." The entity recoiled slightly, but then pressed closer again. The pressure in my mind became painful, like an ice pick behind my eyes. Resistance. Futile. Threshold opened. Dr. Nasser's voice grew louder, the ancient words echoing strangely in the small room. The monitoring equipment began to malfunction, screens flickering with static. I continued my internal mantra. "You are not real. You cannot cross. There is no threshold." The shadow figure began to change, its form elongating, limbs stretching into impossible configurations. The pressure in my mind was now excruciating, a scream of alien concepts forcing their way into my consciousness. Too late, coming through, many coming. With a final surge of desperate will, I mentally shouted, "There is nothing to come through. There is no connection. There is no you." The entity convulsed, its form rippling like smoke in a wind. The pressure in my mind peaked, then suddenly released. The shadow collapsed in on itself, shrinking to a pinpoint of absolute darkness, and then vanished. My paralysis broke. I sat up gasping as the lights in the lab flickered back to normal. Dr. Nasser stood frozen mid-recitation, staring at me with wide eyes. Did it work? I managed to ask through ragged breaths. He glanced at the monitoring equipment, which had returned to normal function. The readings, they've normalized. The communication patterns are gone. I've slept without incident for 3 weeks now. No paralysis, no shadow figures. Dr. Nasser has suspended his research indefinitely, and the Hadley artifacts have been placed in secure storage, away from curious hands and minds. But sometimes, in that liminal space between wakefulness and sleep, I feel a distant pressure, like something pressing against a now closed door. And I wonder if the threshold is truly closed or merely latched, waiting for someone else to unlock it with their attention, their curiosity, their unwitting invitation. Because that's the thing about thresholds. They work in both directions. And somewhere on the other side, I know they're still watching, still waiting, still learning, and perhaps next time they'll find a different way through. I took the security job at Oakwood Asylum because it paid better than my last gig. And honestly, how hard could it be to watch an empty building? The psychiatric hospital had closed down just 3 months ago after nearly a century of operation. Some development company bought the property but was tied up in permit issues, so they needed someone to make sure nobody broke in and hurt themselves. Easy money, I thought. 6 nights a week, 12-hour shifts, just me and my flashlight walking. The halls of a massive empty mental hospital. What could possibly go wrong? The first 2 weeks were mind-numbingly boring. I'd make my rounds every 2 hours, check the security cameras in between, and fight to stay awake until dawn. The building was creepy, sure. Peeling paint, abandoned, wheelchairs, and that antiseptic smell that never quite fades, but nothing I couldn't handle. It was during my 3rd week when things changed. I was making my 2 a.m. round through the East Wing where the long-term patients had stayed. As I turned a corner, I caught something in my peripheral vision, a dark figure, person-shaped, standing in the doorway of room E42. When I spun around and shined my flashlight directly at it, nothing was there. I wrote it off as sleep deprivation. When you're alone in a dark building for 12 hours, your mind plays tricks on you. But the next night, it happened again. Same wing, different room. A shadow figure, just at the edge of my vision, always gone when I turned to look directly. By the end of the month, I was seeing them every night, always in my peripheral vision, always near former patient rooms, always vanishing when directly observed. I started dreading my rounds through the East Wing. One night, I decided to check the security footage. I found the camera covering the hallway where I'd seen a shadow figure just an hour earlier. But as I rewound to that exact time, the footage glitched and went to static for precisely 3 minutes, resuming only after I had left that section of the hallway. I checked other instances. Same result every time. Whenever the shadows appeared, the cameras malfunctioned. My rational mind was running out of explanations. The building manager had given me a master key and told me most rooms were unlocked anyway. Just don't go digging through patient files, he'd said. Those are still confidential and scheduled for relocation. Well, I was way past following rules at this point. I needed answers. I started in the administration office, digging through filing cabinets until I found a hospital directory. That's when I discovered something interesting. The East Wing had housed a special ward called Perceptual Disorders Unit. Further digging revealed case files with a common theme: patients who claimed to see shadow people. These weren't just typical hallucinations. The patients described consistent entities, human-shaped shadows that watched from corners and doorways. Exactly what I had been seeing. I found the research notes of the doctor who ran the unit, Dr. Marcus Whitfield. He had a theory that these shadow people weren't hallucinations at all, but actual entities that existed just outside normal human perception. He believed certain people had brains wired to perceive them, particularly those with specific patterns of neural activity common in some psychiatric conditions. Dr. Whitfield had developed a treatment involving sensory deprivation combined with experimental medication. According to his notes, the goal wasn't to stop patients from seeing the shadows, it was to help them see the shadows more clearly. The treatment doesn't eliminate the perception, he wrote. It amplifies it, stabilizes it. The entities become more distinct, more present. This confirms my theory that they exist independent of the observer. The last entry in his research journal chilled me. Most fascinating development. The entities remain even after patient expiration. Room E42 continues to show activity despite being vacant for 3 weeks since patient 218's passing. I checked the patient log. Room E42, the exact room where I first saw a shadow figure. That night during my rounds, I stood in the middle of the East Wing hallway and spoke aloud to the empty building. "I know you're here," I said, my voice echoing. "I know what Dr. Whitfield did." The temperature dropped so suddenly I could see my breath. My flashlight flickered, then went out completely despite fresh batteries. In the darkness, they appeared. Not just one shadow figure, but dozens lining both sides of the hallway. Not hiding in my peripheral vision anymore, but standing fully visible, watching me. I ran. Sprinted through dark hallways I knew by heart after weeks of patrols, not stopping until I reached the security office. I slammed the door behind me, hands shaking as I checked the cameras. Static. Every single monitor showed nothing but static. Called my supervisor, told him I was sick and needed to leave. He wasn't happy but agreed to come cover the rest of my shift. I didn't tell him why. How could I? I spent the next day researching Dr. Whitfield. He had lost his medical license 5 years before the hospital closed. After 3 patients in his care died unexpectedly, the official cause was listed as heart failure in each case. But there were allegations of experimental treatment without proper oversight. I should have quit right then, but I needed the money, and some stubborn part of me needed answers. So, I went back the next night. My supervisor mentioned nothing unusual about his fill-in shift. The cameras had worked fine for him. No shadow people, no cold spots, nothing out of the ordinary. That night, I brought a digital recorder with me on my rounds. When I reached the East Wing, I felt them watching before I saw anything. I set the recorder on a nearby abandoned nurse's station and walked the hallway asking questions aloud. "What do you want? Why are you still here?" The recorder picked up nothing but static during those moments. But at exactly 3:17 a.m., between my questions, a voice whispered clearly, "We were always here. Whitfield just helped them see us. Now you see us too." I've given my 2 weeks notice. The development company finally got their permits and demolition starts next month. I wonder if tearing down the building will change anything for these entities, or if Dr. Whitfield's experiments created something permanent. Sometimes at home, out of the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of a shadow that shouldn't be there. Just at the edge of my vision, watching, waiting, and I wonder, did I ever really leave Oakwood Asylum? Or did a part of it leave with me? The listing seemed too good to be true. A spacious 2-bedroom in Westbrook Heights for well below market rate. The building was gorgeous, one of those pre-war constructions with ornate moldings and hardwood floors throughout. When I asked the property manager why the rent was so low, she hesitated before mentioning something vague about the unit's history. "Nothing bad," she quickly added. "Just been vacant for a while. Owners eager to get someone in." I should have pressed for details. But I was desperate after my previous landlord sold my building to developers, giving tenants just 30 days to vacate. With my budget and the current rental market, this place was a miracle. I signed the lease that day. The first week was uneventful. I unpacked, arranged furniture, and started to feel at home. The apartment was oddly shaped. The living room connected to the kitchen through a short angular hallway, and the bedrooms were on opposite sides rather than adjacent. But I chalked it up to the building's age and quirky architecture. It was during my second week that I first saw it. I was in the kitchen making dinner when I felt a sudden chill. I turned toward the hallway and froze. Standing at the entrance was a figure in what looked like a long, dark cloak. It was perfectly still, its face, if it had one, hidden in the shadow of a hood. I dropped the knife I was holding. It clattered against the floor, and in that split second when I glanced down, the figure vanished. I searched the entire apartment, checking behind doors and closets everywhere someone could hide. Nothing. I convinced myself it was stress, lack of sleep, my mind playing tricks. But 3 days later it happened again. This time the figure stood in the corner of my bedroom as I was getting dressed for work. Again, perfectly still, just watching. When I gasped and stepped back, it disappeared. These sightings continued, becoming more frequent. The figure would appear in different rooms, standing by the bathroom door while I brushed my teeth, in the hallway as I walked to the kitchen, once even at the foot of my bed when I woke in the middle of the night. It never moved, never made a sound. It simply stood there until I acknowledged its presence, then vanished. After 2 weeks of this, I was at my breaking point. I hadn't had a full night's sleep in days. I decided to talk to my neighbors, to see if the building had a history I should know about. Mrs. Abernathy in 4B had lived there for 30 years. When I mentioned my apartment number, her expression changed. "Oh, you're in the Henderson unit," she said, inviting me in for tea. Henderson unit? That's what we old-timers call it. After Marion Henderson. She lived there for decades, kept to herself mostly. Always wore this dark housecoat even to get the mail. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the building's air conditioning. What happened to her? Mrs. Abernathy stirred her tea slowly. Died in the apartment winter of 2018. Nobody noticed for months. Mail piling up, you know. By the time they found her, she trailed off, then added quietly. They had to do quite a renovation afterward. That night I researched Marion Henderson. There wasn't much. A brief obituary mentioning she had no surviving family, had worked as a night librarian until retirement, and was devoted to her home. One detail stood out. She had lived in the building for 47 years. The next day, I spoke with the building superintendent, a gruff man named Hector who'd worked there for decades. He was reluctant to discuss the apartment at first, but eventually opened up. That unit wasn't always like it is now, he explained. Used to be 2 separate studios with a shared wall. Henderson had one, and the other belonged to different tenants over the years. After she died, the owner decided to combine them into a larger unit. More profitable that way. "So my apartment used to be 2 different places?" I asked. Hector nodded. They knocked down part of the dividing wall, rerouted some plumbing, created that hallway connecting everything. Took almost a year to complete. Place sat empty all that time. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Marion Henderson, about how my apartment used to be 2 separate spaces, about how the figure always appeared in transitional areas, doorways, hallways, corners where walls met. Around 3 a.m. I felt the now familiar chill. The cloaked figure stood in my bedroom doorway, but this time, instead of gasping or turning away, I sat up and spoke directly to it. "Marion?" I said softly. "Is that you?" The figure remained motionless, but the temperature dropped further. I could see my breath clouding in front of me. "This was your home," I continued. "For a long time. I understand why you're still here. Was it my imagination, or did the hood move slightly as if the figure was tilting its head? I'm not trying to take your home from you," I said. "Maybe we can coexist." For the first time, the figure moved. It raised what appeared to be an arm, pointing toward the wall that separated my bedroom from the living room, the wall that, according to Hector, hadn't existed in its current form before the renovation, then it vanished. The next day I examined that wall carefully. It looked ordinary enough, painted drywall, seemingly solid. But when I knocked on different sections, one area sounded different, hollower somehow. I pressed against it, and to my surprise, felt it give slightly. I went to the building's basement, where residents stored extra belongings, and found a toolbox I'd packed during the move. With a small hammer and screwdriver, I carefully created a hole in the hollow-sounding section of wall. The smell hit me first. Musty, old, like books left in a damp basement. I widened the hole and shone my phone's flashlight inside. There was a space between the walls larger than a normal gap should be, and wedged into this space were dozens of books, their spines lined up neatly despite the cramped quarters. I managed to extract one. It was a leather-bound copy of Wuthering Heights, its pages yellowed with age. Inside the cover was a bookplate, from the library of Marian Henderson. I pulled out several more books, all with the same bookplate. Classics, poetry collections, reference volumes. A librarian's carefully curated personal collection. That evening, I arranged the books on my previously empty bookshelf. As I placed the last one, I felt the temperature drop. The cloaked figure stood in the corner, watching. But this time, I wasn't afraid. "I found your books," I said. "They must have been hidden when they renovated, when they changed your home." The figure remained still, but somehow its stillness felt different. Less threatening, more attentive. "I'll keep them safe," I promised. "And I'll look for more. There might be other things of yours trapped in these walls." Over the next few days, I carefully explored more sections of the wall. Behind one portion of the bathroom wall, I found a jewelry box containing a silver locket and a few modest rings. In another section near the kitchen, I discovered a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. I displayed these items respectfully around the apartment. The jewelry box on my dresser, the letters in a decorative box on the coffee table. With each discovery, the atmosphere in the apartment changed subtly. The chill that preceded the figure's appearances became less intense, less frequent. But one night, about a week after my wall explorations, I woke to find the figure standing closer to my bed than it had ever been before. Close enough that if it had been a physical person, I could have reached out and touched the dark cloak, sat up slowly. "Marian, is something wrong?" The figure raised its arm again, pointing not at the walls this time, but toward the floor. The next day I examined the hardwood floors carefully. In my bedroom, I noticed one section where the boards didn't quite match the others, slightly newer, slightly different in color. I pried up the loose boards, revealing a small space beneath. There lay a leather-bound journal and a tarnished key. The journal belonged to Marian, her neat handwriting filling pages with observations about books she'd read, changes in the neighborhood, over decades, and increasingly her fear of being forced out of her home. The final entries were disturbing. She wrote about hearing conversations through the walls, about the building management discussing renovations, combining units, getting rid of the old to make way for the new. She described hiding her most precious possessions where they won't find them, won't throw them away like they want to throw me away. The last entry, dated just days before her death, according to the obituary, read, "They won't take my home from me. I've lived between these walls for 47 years. I'll stay between these walls forever if I have to." The key was old-fashioned, heavy. It didn't match any locks in my apartment. After examining it closely, I realized it might fit the small door in the basement hallway, one that Hector had said led to old storage areas no longer in use. That night, I waited until the building was quiet, then made my way to the basement with a flashlight. The key slid into the lock of the small door perfectly, turning with a heavy click. Beyond was a narrow corridor lined with storage cages, most empty and thick with dust. At the very end was a cage with a padlock that looked newer than the others. Inside, stacked neatly, were boxes labeled Henderson Estate. The padlock was cheap, easy to break with a screwdriver from my toolbox. Inside the boxes, I found photo albums, more books, framed certificates from the library where Marion had worked, and a small urn with a simple engraving, Thomas Henderson, beloved brother. I brought everything upstairs, arranging the photos on shelves, adding the books to the collection, placing the urn on the mantel above the decorative fireplace. That night, for the first time in weeks, the cloaked figure didn't appear, nor the next night or the one after that. I began to think perhaps Marion had found peace, that recovering her possessions had somehow resolved whatever kept her tethered to the apartment. Then, exactly 1 month after I'd moved in, I woke at midnight to find the figure standing at the foot of my bed, but something was different. The cloak seemed less substantial, and I could almost see through it to the wall behind. "Marion?" I whispered. The figure raised both arms slowly and lifted its hood. I gasped. There was a face there, faint but discernible, an elderly woman with sharp features and eyes that, despite their ghostly transparency, conveyed a clear emotion. Gratitude. She nodded once, then faded from view. I thought that would be the end of it, that Marion had made her final appearance to thank me before moving on. I was wrong. 3 days later, I came home from work to find all the lights in my apartment on, though I was certain I'd turned them off that morning. As I moved through the rooms turning them off, I noticed something odd. All the items I'd recovered from the walls and basement, the books, jewelry box, photos, the urn, had been rearranged, not haphazardly, as if someone had searched the place, but deliberately. Centered, highlighted, like exhibits in a museum. That night, the temperature dropped again, but differently. Not the sharp, sudden chill that preceded Marion's appearances, but a gradual cooling, as if the entire apartment was becoming a refrigerator. I woke to find not one figure, but two. Marion stood by my bedroom door, still translucent, still recognizable. But beside her was another cloaked figure, this one solid, dense, its cloak seeming to absorb the darkness around it. Marion's ghost gestured toward the second figure, then at the urn on my dresser. The message was clear. Thomas, her brother. But unlike Marion's apparition, this one didn't feel grateful or at peace. It emanated anger, resentment. As I watched, it moved. Not the slight movements Marion had shown, but a deliberate step toward my bed. Marion's ghost moved between us, seeming to confront her brother. There was no sound, but I sensed an argument, a disagreement. The darker figure pushed past her, advancing another step. I scrambled out of bed, backing toward the door. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice shaking. The dark figure pointed at the floor, then swept its arm across the room. The meaning was unmistakable. "This is mine." Over the next week, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Objects moved when I wasn't looking. Doors I'd closed would be open when I returned. Once I woke to find all my clothes from the closet piled in the center of the living room. Marion's ghost appeared occasionally, always seeming to try to intervene, to stand between me and the darker presence. But the brother's spirit was stronger, more substantial, more capable of affecting the physical world. I spoke with Mrs. Abernathy again, asking if she knew anything about Marion's brother. Her expression darkened. "Thomas? He lived with her for a while in the 90s after he got out of prison. Nasty piece of work. There were complaints about shouting, things breaking. Then one day he was gone. Marion told everyone he'd moved out west." "When was this?" "Must have been 97 or 98. Marion changed after that. More withdrawn. Started wearing that dark housecoat all the time." I researched Thomas Henderson and found a short article from 1994 about his release from prison after serving time for aggravated assault and attempted murder. Nothing after that. No death certificate, no further arrests, no paper trail at all after 1998. That night I sat in the living room with all the lights on, waiting. Around 2 a.m., both spirits appeared. Marion's ghost by the bookshelf, Thomas's, darker presence by the hallway. "I know about you, Thomas," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know you disappeared in 1998. What happened? What did Marion do?" The dark figure lunged toward me, but Marion's ghost intercepted it. For a moment, they seemed to struggle, two translucent forms wrestling in my living room. Then Thomas's spirit broke free and swept toward the wall that had once separated the two apartments. Understanding dawned on me with horrifying clarity. Marion hadn't lived alone in this building for all those decades. At some point, she had acquired both apartments. The second one, the one that had been combined with hers during renovation, had been Thomas's. "She killed you," I whispered, "and hid you in the wall. That's why you're angry. That's why you're still here." The dark figure pounded against the wall, causing the actual drywall to crack. Marion's ghost tried again to intervene, but Thomas was too strong, too full of decades of rage. I fled the apartment that night, staying with a friend. The next day, I called Hector and asked directly about the renovation. When they combined the apartments, did they find anything unusual in the walls? There was a long silence before he answered. "Why are you asking about this?" "Please, Hector, I need to know." He sighed heavily. "They found remains. Human remains. Police came, did an investigation, determined they'd been there for decades. No identification possible after all that time. And no one thought to mention this to potential tenants?" I asked incredulously. "Owner paid a lot of money to keep it quiet, changed the apartment number, did a complete renovation. Legally, after a certain amount of time and changes to a property, disclosure isn't required. I've given notice on the apartment. I'm moving out at the end of the month. But I can't just leave, can't just abandon Marion to her brother's wrath for eternity. She did something terrible, yes. But living alone with that secret, with her brother's spirit trapped in the adjacent apartment, watching her through the walls for 20 years. Hasn't she served her sentence?" Yesterday, I contacted a local priest experienced in house blessings. He's coming tomorrow to perform a ritual. Not an exorcism exactly, but a blessing, a release. I've gathered all of Thomas's possessions I could find, and Marion's too. After the blessing, I'll ensure they're properly buried or preserved. I don't know if it will work. I don't know if two spirits locked in decades of conflict can find peace, but I have to try. Because what I've come to understand is that my apartment isn't haunted by ghosts. It is a ghost itself. Two separate spaces forced into one, just as Marion and Thomas are forced to coexist. Neither fully here nor gone, caught in between, like the items hidden in the walls. Some boundaries, once broken, can never be properly restored. Some renovations reveal more than just old wiring and hidden treasures, and some tenants never truly leave, even when the lease ends. Thanks for staying with us until the very end. If you enjoyed tonight's chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that keep you up at night. Share your favorite part in the comments. We're always watching, and remember, at Nocturnal Narrative Studio, the night never truly ends.